Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today's workshop. I'm Sean Spivey, Senior Counsel and Chief of Staff of the Broadband Task Force here at the FCC. The Broadband Data Collection, or BDC, is a new framework for collecting information on broadband service availability, born out of the Broadband Data Act. As most of you participating today know well, the new BDC program will collect location-level information on fixed broadband service availability throughout the country. This data will be subject to review by governmental entities, individual consumers, and other third parties, as well as verification by the FCC. The broadband maps that the FCC will create from these new data will play a critical role in the efforts of federal, state, and tribal governments to ensure that essential broadband services are made available throughout the United States, and that broadband infrastructure funding is carefully targeted to the areas most in need. This workshop is the first in a series of events we are hosting throughout the month of August. Today's workshop is focused on the Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric, the common data set of all locations in the United States where fixed broadband service can be installed. In upcoming technical assistance workshops, we will cover how filers should prepare and submit fixed and mobile availability data, as well as how to access the BDC system and common error codes you may encounter when filing availability data. We hope that you will join us for these future sessions. We will begin today's workshop with a few short presentations on what the Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric is, how to get access to Fabric data for your service area or jurisdiction, and the business rules for how broadband serviceable locations are identified in the Fabric. But we also want to make sure that we hear from you. So we reserve time for questions after the presentations. Please email your questions to bdcwebinar@fcc.gov or utilize the Q&A function in the Zoom platform. We will do our best to answer as many of your questions as time allows. If we are unable to answer a specific question today, you may submit your question via the FCC's online BDC Help Center at fcc.gov/broadbanddata/help. You can find additional information and resources in the BDC Help Center, as well as a detailed user guide for the BDC system. The website will be regularly updated with additional resources and FAQs, and I would encourage you to visit the website often throughout this process. We appreciate you taking the time to participate in this workshop, and we hope that it will be helpful as you participate in the inaugural BDC filing window, which opened on June 30th and will close on September 1st of this year. With that, let's turn to our first presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Chelsea Fallon, Senior Implementation Officer for the Broadband Data Task Force. The floor is yours, Chelsea.
Thank you, Sean, and thanks everyone for joining today. So I'm going to start off with a quick overview of what the Fabric is and give some general pointers about it. So as Sean mentioned, the Broadband Serviceable Location Fabric is a data set of all of the locations in the country where broadband internet access service has been or could be installed. It is essentially a list of every residential and small business structure in the country, along with a unique identifier, an address, and geographic coordinates, along with some other information. The Fabric has been developed for the BDC so that we, and by we I mean the FCC, as well as you, the providers, and the public, can work from a single standardized universal set of locations for the collection and reporting of fixed broadband availability data. And it essentially serves as the denominator for determining where broadband service is available and where it is not. And so, as many of you probably know, fixed broadband providers have two options for submitting their availability data in the BDC system. Those that choose the list of locations option must use the unique location IDs from the Fabric as the basis for that list, along with information about the service offered at that location. We also recommend that filers choosing the Polygon option for submitting fixed availability data also get access to and use the Fabric. You can overlay your Polygon on the Fabric points and then see if those points and the addresses associated with them represent the structures where you have a connection and service or could perform a standard broadband installation. And you can do this overlay using GIS software. You can also upload a Polygon GIS file in the BDC system, and the system will generate a map and a list of the fabric points that the polygon overlaps, and then that list can be downloaded. And this just brings up sort of another general point about filing. Don't feel like you have to wait until all of your BDC availability data is complete and perfect to start using the BDC system and uploading data. You can upload things and test out files. You can also upload data for a particular area, a particular market. You can upload a file to see if any errors or flags are generated. You can upload, look at it, delete it if you want to. Basically play around with the system before you get to the point of certifying and submitting a filing. A couple more points. The Fabric dataset is actually made up of two files, the active locations and the secondary addresses. The active locations file is what we think of as the main Fabric dataset. It has a record of every location along with information about that location. So I mentioned the address, the geographic coordinates. It's also the number of units, the building type, the land use code, and the census block and other geographic boundaries that the point falls into. If a location has more than one address associated with it, those additional addresses will be in the secondary address file. And that can be helpful when doing address matching to see if there are other addresses that might be associated with a particular location. And then one last thing I wanted to note, the active locations file includes the locations that meet the definition of a broadband serviceable location, or a BSL, which Steve is going to discuss in a minute, along with other locations that are not considered BSL. And this is indicated by the BSL flag field in the data set. And just wanted to note that the BDC system will only accept location IDs where the BSL flag is true. So please remove any locations from your file upload where the BSL flag is false, or else you will receive an error message. So thank you, and I am now going to turn it over to Mark Gutman from CostQuest, who's going to talk about the process of getting access to the fabric.
Thank you very much, Chelsea. If you haven't already received the fabric, getting access to it is a pretty straightforward process. So if you filed Form 477 in June 2021, look for an email from nbfsupport@costquest.com. That's Nancy Bob Frank, support@costquest.com. If you don't see that email, please check your junk or your spam folder. If you don't see an invitation email at all, please send an email to nbfsupport@costquest.com and also include your name, email, and the FCC registration number, the FRN, for your organization. It'll expedite the process if the person sending that email is the person who will be able to sign a license agreement on behalf of your company. We'll then email that contact person a link to our help desk so that they can create a user account. Keep in mind, this is a unique account not tied to any other FCC accounts. Also, if we can't find your name in your company in our system, we may ask you to complete a Add New Entity form. And once you have access to our help desk system, if you're authorized to sign a license on behalf of your company, you'll then submit a license request form. And you can find that form within our help desk under the Request Your Data section. It's actually request your data, and then within that, step 1, request a license link within the help desk. After the license request form is submitted, you'll receive a confirmation email. And CostQuest will then validate the request, and if it's free of exceptions or errors, prepare the license and email a link to a license agreement. And after that license agreement has been signed, it's an electronic agreement. So after the license agreement has been signed electronically by both parties, we'll send you a link to the Fabric data. The Fabric data will be available as an email link. You can download that zip file directly from the link. And a few tips. First, make sure that NBF support at costquest.com and no reply at signnow.com are whitelisted or identified as safe senders in your email. That should keep the correspondence between our license registration system and the help desk out of your spam or junk folder. Also, when we send you the data, we send it on a whole county basis. That means that if your FCC Form 477 has filed only a single census block at a county, we'll provide the entire county of data. So we're trying to give you more data than is necessarily represented in your 477 filing. And as Chelsea indicated, the zip file consists of two CSV files, an active CSV file and a secondary CSV file. Further, within the cover email, we'll include a link to a README file. The README explains each file, provides links to a data dictionary and a record count workbook. The record count workbook tells you how many records you should expect on import in each county. So it's a good way to cross-verify the number of data records that are loaded into your system versus the number of records that we expect to be out for that county, or we expect to be available for that county. And finally, these instructions are available in the FCC's BDC Help Center. Look under the Location Fabric icon for articles about how to access the Fabric. And another question that we'll get frequently is, what should new entities do? If you're a new entity, you haven't been in the Form 477 system, please send an email to NBF support at costquest.com and include the name and email of the provider's contact person, your name, and the FRN. Of course, it'll expedite the process if the person opening that request is also the person who can sign the license. Another question that we frequently get is, how are the baseline counties determined? And how do you get additional counties if you need them? The counties included are those that were filed in your June 2021 Form 477. If you need to add more counties or remove more counties, the administrator of that license can submit a modified county request. That county modification form can be found by selecting Submit a Request at the top of the website, and then within that, select the Modify a County list. And with that, those should be the steps to get you the Fabric data files that you'll need for your filing. From here, Steve Rosenberg is going to talk a little bit about what is a BSL and how those records are constructed.
Thanks, Mark. As Mark said, I'm going to talk a little bit about what a BSL is. The Broadband Data Act and subsequent FCC orders require that we collect broadband availability data specifically for mass market broadband locations. So at the highest level, a BSL, a broadband serviceable location, is a location that can or should be able to receive mass market fixed broadband service. The Commission also adopted requirements that say BSLs will be defined as a set of geographic coordinates, a latitude and longitude, that are on a building footprint. Of course, there's no single data set that meets those requirements exactly. So the Fabric combines a number of underlying source data sets to generate a comprehensive list of BSLs. Most locations in the Fabric are on single location property or parcel with only one building on it. Think of a single family home parcel. Identifying a BSL is relatively straightforward in those circumstances. There's a bit more to do to add data sources that capture the address, but it's relatively straightforward to identify a BSL for a single family home. It's not always that simple though. Sometimes there are multiple residential or commercial buildings with multiple tenants on a single property. Think of an apartment or condo complex or a shopping mall. In most of those cases, we typically consider each building or structure on the property to be a BSL. In addition, when a single location parcel has multiple structures on it, including structures that are not housing units, we consider and have tried to identify the primary residential structure or home as the property, on the property as the Fabric location. There are some exceptions to that general approach that come with the mass market broadband requirements. Community anchor institutions, for example, things like schools, government buildings, or large enterprises, often don't subscribe to mass market broadband. We use the data we have available to exclude such locations from being considered BSLs. but they do appear in the fabric with the BSL indicator set as false. As Chelsea mentioned, you need to exclude these locations where the BSL indicator is false from your filings. Things get a bit more complicated when you have community anchor institutions. Think of some college campuses or military bases that include BSLs like dormitories. Those are treated a little bit differently. I'll end this brief description of a very complicated process by noting that the data can be messy. Different data sources can contradict one another. Data sources are very limited in certain areas of the country. Data are inconsistent across different areas. That's why there's a challenge process in place to help us correct data and improve the fabric over time. With that, I'll turn things back to Chelsea.
Thank you, Steve. I'm just going to quickly close by highlighting the fact that we do have a number of resources on the BDC online help center page, and that you can find that by going to fcc.gov/broadbanddata/help. There is a section there on the location fabric right on the homepage, and it has a large set of frequently asked questions about the fabric. There are also a number of help articles and video tutorials there on how to work with the fabric, more information on what's included in the data set, as well as other links on the Help Center page for how to format your fixed availability data, which is really closely related to the fabric. If you still have a question, you can feel free to fill out the online help form. And just wanted to highlight, if you feel like you need some one-on-one help walking through specific questions about the fabric area, the geographic area that you're working with, how to format your data, please request that in your initial help request, and we can set up a kind of a session to walk through that, set up a video call, do screen sharing with the help desk resources as necessary. And so with that, I will turn things back over to Sean. Thank you.
Thanks, Chelsea. We're getting a lot of questions, so thank you everyone for submitting them. As a reminder, if you could use the Q&A function, which is slightly different than the chat function, that will just help us kind of keep up with questions. So please, if you've asked something in the chat, try and copy and paste it over into the Q&A. Again, we're getting a lot, so we're going to try and get through as many as we can. And if we don't answer your question, you can submit it through the BDC Help Center, and we can try and answer it there. Mark, this first question is for you. Why does my fabric data include locations that are outside of my service footprint or in census blocks from which I did not previously submit broadband deployment data in Form 477?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are a couple reasons that we find. So first, like I said earlier, the fabric data is generated for an entire county at a time. We did not look for service areas or franchise areas or anything like that. If you touched a county with one census block in Form 477, you got the entire county. So we are attempting to be over-inclusive there. The other thing that happens is we are also including locations, and both Steve and Chelsea have noted this in their discussions, but of all the locations in your fabric file, you should only file those where the BSL flag is marked to true. We do also include locations in there where the BSL flag is marked as false. Those are going to be things, as Steve indicated, like community anchor institutions, schools, and such. Those are included in there, and a little bit more on the use of the BSL flag is touched on in another question. So why don't we turn to that one? I think that's Chelsea.
Right. So, I think one question we've gotten quite a bit is related to this, and sort of why do I get this error when uploading data in the BDC system, that the location ID, X or whatever the number is invalid. And one, it could be that the location ID number was entered incorrectly, but I think the most common reason is that, I think as we've mentioned, the BDC system only accepts locations that are BSLs where the BSL flag is true. And as Steve kind of mentioned, he went through what a BSL is and the types of locations in the fabric that do have a BSL flag of false. These non-BSL locations are left in, one, because they can provide some context and a reference point for looking at the other locations that are BSLs, or seeing, okay, oh, there's a hospital, there's a school. And in addition, if you do believe that a location has been misidentified as a non-BSL and should actually be a BSL or vice versa, you can submit that information later as a challenge to the fabric. And having those locations in the data set will make it easier to indicate in a bulk fabric challenge that the BSL flag, you think that should be changed, as opposed to requiring the challenger to provide all of the identifying information for creating a new BSL.
Thanks, Chelsea. This next one's probably for Steve. Steve, can I use Microsoft Excel to open my Fabric data file?
Sorry, not paying attention. So maybe, but I would say we don't recommend it. Excel is a number of records that it can open. And so it's probably only going to work if you have a small number of lightly populated counties in the extract that you get from CostQuest. And even then, you need to be careful because Excel will treat text fields with the block ID as numbers, and they will sort of mess up the data that are in there. So you need to use the import function in Excel if you want to use it. The limit, I alluded to this earlier, is about 1 million rows. And so for any sum of your counties or any county that exceeds that 1 million records, Excel is just going to truncate what it opens and give you an error message. To open that file, we'd suggest using a data management tool like Microsoft Access, SQL Server, or Postgres. And we have a article in our help function that we will post into the chat for more information about that.
Great, thanks, Steve. Chelsea, I think back over to you. Do I need to have all of my locations in my data before I upload it into the BDC system?
Thanks, Sean. So no, you do not need to have that. The system will accept a shorter list, and we think it could be helpful for filers to upload a subset of data to ensure that the data are formatted correctly. Again, see if there are any flags or error messages that result that could apply to the entire data set. I would note that it is important to try to upload all of your data, all of your availability data before moving on to run the final data checks part of the filing process, which is sort of the step that comes before certification and submission.
Thanks, Chelsea. Another one for you. Will each unit in an apartment or condominium building be considered its own separate BSL?
So that's a good question. So no, each location, or which is basically represents a structure in the fabric, has a unit count associated with it. So the number of individual condominium or apartment units or others, business suite units in a building, those would be listed there, but the structure would just be listed once.
Thanks. Steve, a question for you, and I think we touched on this when we're getting quite a few questions, so we should probably revisit it. What should I do if I think there are inaccuracies in the fabric? For example, what should I do if a subscriber address that I have is not listed on the fabric?
Yeah, so two parts to this answer. So the first part is that shortly before each filing round, the fabric is set. We can't change the fabric once the filing window is open. That would make it incredibly hard for ISPs to figure out how to file their data, to have that sort of base data set changing while the window is open. We have to go with what we have. But we also know that mapping every location is not going to be perfect the first time out. So we encourage you to take note of any issues that you encounter as you prepare your filing. Once the process opens for submitting challenges and proposed corrections to the fabric begins in the fall, you'll be able to submit those challenges for incorporation into a future round's fabric.
Thanks, Steve. Let's see. Mark, a question for you about can I use the fabric data to create a mailing list or a marketing campaign or plan my network deployment?
No, the use of the fabric data set is limited to the permitted uses described in the license agreement with CostQuest. If you need a copy of the license agreement, please send an email to our support desk, nvfsupport@costquest.com, and we can get that to you. If you have any questions, you can also send a question about the use to the help desk, and we'll get it answered as quickly as we can. Thanks, Sean.
Sure. Steve, a question for you. I have some data like E911 data or a list of addresses. Can I submit that information as a challenge to the fabric?
So such data can be a good starting point. They can be a good basis, but they're not enough to file a challenge by themselves. So challenges need to include all the information noted in the data specification. So it's not just location or address, it's the full list of fields that Chelsea mentioned earlier. And as noted in the PM that announced the challenge process, you need to ensure that the locations you want to submit meet the commission's requirements for being treated as a BSL. So just having address list or location lists or even an E911 database will not necessarily align in all circumstances with the BSL definition. We also encourage you to ensure that you have the appropriate data rights to share any commercial information with the FCC. We don't want you all to get to take commercial data that you may have access to, but may not have the rights to send to us or to publish, to simply pass that along.
Thanks, Steve. We're getting a couple of questions about NTIA's BEAD program, the $42 billion broadband infrastructure program under the IIJA. I'll take that one. So while we're collaborating closely with NTIA on the maps and their implementation of the program, we know that the maps are, the kind of trigger for when they will make their initial allocations. We are focused on our part of the task, which is getting the broadband maps as accurate, deployed as accurately and quickly as possible. And specific questions about the BEAD program should be directed to NTIA. I believe they have an email address for questions. I can't remember exactly what it is, but I believe it's something like internetforall@ntia.gov. But you can go on their website if you have specific questions about the BEAD program. Mark, a question for you. It seems like certain town names are missing in the fabric data. Why is that, and what should I do about it?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. This comes up, and there can be a couple reasons. So when the addresses are standardized and we use a postal standard to standardize those addresses. When they're standardized, our process uses the primary name that we find associated with that zip code. So there are many cases where a zip code may have multiple cities. My zip code here where I am is East Walnut Hills, Ohio, but it's also Cincinnati, Ohio. Our process would tend to favor identifying it to Cincinnati, Ohio. So that's why you may not see the town name, the specific town name that you're looking at. And there are a couple ways that you could investigate this. First, you could map the fabric. Chelsea had mentioned earlier using some of the resources that are available on the BDC site. You can take the fabric data, put it on a map, and find out the area that you're looking for, and then use those town names. Just geographically search, use those town names as the reference. The other notion is, because we are more focused on the zip code itself rather than the textual town name, we would recommend, if you're doing a join to find things, to do the join based on the zip code that you're looking for rather than the city or town name. So you would have an equivalent zip code on both sides of the join. But a good question. Thanks, Sean.
Sure, thanks, Mark. Let's see. Another one for you, Mark. Can you tell us about the sources of the location data?
Yeah, so the fabric is constructed from a number of sources. We use parcel data, we use addresses, we use tax assessment records, and we use imagery, which we convert into building footprints. All of those are put together in our model to help better identify serviceable locations. As Steve had indicated earlier, we can't just use one source. We have to use all those sources, combine them, allow them to corroborate one another, cross-check one another, and inform better decisions through the synergy of the data than just one piece of data specifically. So those are the sources that we use in the model.
Thanks, Mark. Steve, a question for you about the unique location ID. Will the location number assigned today change?
So starting with the first production fabric, our approach should maintain the fabric ID from round to round. There may be some exceptions. If we shift from one building footprint to another on a single property, for example, during the challenge process, that would generate a new fabric ID, that combination of parcel plus building footprint. But generally speaking, the fabric IDs should remain constant from round to round. We've been trying to work hard to do that because we know that the continuity can be helpful for fire.
Thanks, Steve. Chelsea, a question for you. Are there specific instructions for uploading a polygon when applying it to the fabric and subsequently downloading a list of addresses that fall inside the polygon?
So, well, first of all, I would encourage everyone to look at the user guide for the BDC system. I know it is a large document, but I think going to the specific section on uploading the GIS availability data will give you the specific buttons to click. But essentially, if you upload a polygon, you will have the opportunity in the system to download the list of locations along with the characteristics about your service that you uploaded with your polygon. So it will have the location ID and the information about your service that you uploaded. I don't think it will include the address field for download. That will not be part of it, but the location ID will be there. And I think the format that the download comes in is very similar to the data spec for the list of locations filing. So, one wanted to sort of switch from doing the polygon to the list of locations option and using that would be a way to go there, which is sort of check and make sure that everything in the download was accurate and matched the specification for the list of location data before, uploading again. And then also want to mention that the fixed availability filers have to either use, either the list of location or the Polygon option for all of their fixed availability data in one filing.
Thanks, Chelsea. Maybe another question for you. Is there a way to pull a list of anchor institutions in a particular area?
Sure. So in one of the fields in the Fabric data set in the active locations file is the building type code. And there are a few different building type codes associated with every location, sort of residential, business, X for both, G for group quarters. And there is one of the codes is C, and that is for community anchor institution. So if one wanted to filter for just that part of the data, that would be the way to do it.
Great. And so if the Fabric identifies a community anchor institution with the BSL flag as false because they don't think that, because the data indicate that mass market service isn't provided there, but a service provider does provide mass market service there, how should the service provider approach that situation? Would it be just to file it as a challenge to the Fabric data? Is that?
Yeah, so in that case, we recommend submitting a challenge to that information, and we have the data specification for bulk Fabric challenges has been released, and so I would, if you're finding locations that you want to challenge, you can start preparing that, since we are planning to open the window for that in September after the initial availability window closes. And as I mentioned earlier, that would just basically indicating in the data upload that you think that the BSL flag should be changed.
Great, thanks, Chelsea. Mark, a question for you. Will every organization have a secondary file?
No, they won't. The secondary file covers the condition where a structure typically has, where a structure may have two addresses as assigned by the tax assessor. So we see this situation a lot in urban areas where a building is on two streets, and it's at the corner of two streets, I should say. One entrance is facing one street, one entrance is facing another street. That is the situation we tend to see these secondary records pop up in. This is a minority of all cases and will not be for every provider. So you may not have a secondary file if we couldn't find any secondary addresses in the assessment information.
Thanks, Mark. I think I can try and take this next one. For nonprofit entities, are there any thoughts on when we'll be able to access the Fabric to prepare constituents or folks? Are we waiting for the public version of the maps? So the task force and CostQuest, we are prioritizing getting access to the Fabric data to broadband internet access service providers and to governmental entities, since they're the ones that need to submit data. Well, the internet service providers are required to submit data as of September 1st, and governmental entities are able to submit verified broadband availability data as of the same time period. So we are trying to make sure that all 2,500 plus ISPs, the 56 states and territories, the 3,400 plus counties, other governmental entities are licensed and have access to the Fabric. but there will be a process for others to get access to Fabric data, particularly for participation in the Fabric Challenge process. And we will announce some processes and procedures for that in the future. So please stay tuned on that. Visit fcc.gov/broadband data early and often for more information. Let's see. Next question, I believe, is for Mark. Can the metadata or the location information be downloaded for all locations as a bulk download, or is it available for only one county at a time?
Yeah, let me make sure I understand this, or maybe I'll restate it a little bit. If you're covering 10 counties, you get one file with those 10 counties concatenated together. So we don't give you 10 distinct files. We give you one file with all of those counties put together. I think that was your question, so I hope I answered it there.
Okay, if the questioner that didn't answer it, feel free to take another swing in the Q&A box. See, Steve, I'm going to ask you a question, and feel free to bring in others too, if helpful. But when reviewing the Fabric and comparing it to our data, I think meaning the service provider's data or the entity's data, if I have an exact match on the address itself, but the lat long are a little different, how many digits should we consider, after which should we consider it a match?
So I'll take a first pass, and if the GIS folks from the FCC want to fix it afterwards, they can clean it up a little bit. I'd say we don't recommend matching on lat long. So we're currently publishing, I think it's 6 or 8 digits in the Fabric, and that corresponds to a few inches or less, oftentimes much less. And those differences, you know, at that level, even at the 5th digit, which is about 1 meter generally, aren't likely to be meaningful. You know, if you're seeing that there's a different building, or you're seeing that it's a great distance, it might be that, you know, there's sort of a mismatch and there's a Fabric challenge sort of buried in there. But just looking at the exact match down to 5, 6 or more digits on the Fabric is probably going to be a little bit misleading.
Thanks, Steve. Mark, I'm going to jump back to you for a related question. Is the Fabric data only available in lat long format, or can it be requested in like an XY data format?
Yeah, the spec right now, we put the data out in latitude and longitude, and specifically what I mean by that is GCS or WGS84. So geographic coordinate system, that's the way we're putting it out for everybody. And then if they need to transform it or reproject it, they can do that in whatever particular system they want. But that's not the way that we deliver it. I'd have to defer a little bit to the BDC support folks, if they may be able to do some conversions in cases like that. But the spec is GCS 84.
Thanks, Mark. Let's see. Chelsea, a question for you. Hello, I like the greeting has been very nice. We are a fixed wireless service provider, and my question is, if I am going to upload fixed broadband coverage as a location list, do I need to file fixed broadband supporting data?
So that's a good question. So if you are submitting data on fixed broadband availability, fixed wireless, and you choose the list of location option instead of the polygon option, there's still some supporting data does need to be provided in the BDC system, but it is a lot less than what needs to be submitted if you are choosing the polygon option. And so if you are doing the location list, you would have to provide some information in a form in the BDC system about the methodology that you used to generate your data. And if you you choose the Polygon option, then the coverage area has to be based on propagation modeling, and the propagation parameters must conform to those adopted by the commission. And then you would need to submit information via upload on the propagation modeling, the link budget, the infrastructure data, clutter data. So several additional files would need to be submitted if you're submitting the Polygon option for fixed wireless.
Thanks, Chelsea. I think I can take this next question. Can we file multiple Fabric location files in the event that the service provider is nationwide to address things like a file size issue? That is a good question. Yes, you can. The filing interface essentially concatenates all the individual availability files you upload, and it's probably not a bad idea to split a very large list into multiple files for upload, just to be sure that you don't violate the uniqueness standards in the data specification. So yes, absolutely. Mark, a question for you. I see only base address and unit count associated with it in the data. Do we have unit details, like if it's an apartment A or unit B on that base address?
No, as Chelsea indicated, the records themselves, the location records themselves they tend to capture a structure. We do not retain records for those individual units in there, apartment A, apartment B, apartment C. What we do is we sum up the number of units that we see within that location record and apply that into the units field.
Thanks, Mark. I think that this question has been asked and answered, but I'm going to cover it again just because I think it's an important one. Chelsea, so to make sure I understand, if a BSL flag is set to false, we do not upload those locations, correct?
That is correct. If the BSL flag is false, please remove that record from your data and do not include it in your upload.
Great. Are there templates available to follow to prepare our data to be submitted? I'll try taking this one. Yes. There are templates linked in a help desk article that we have published about filing availability data. The article title is How to Format Fixed Broadband Availability Location List. And Kimia or someone might be able to post a link to it in the chat, but it is available on the help desk or the help center website. And if you just search for that knowledge base article, you should be able to find it relatively easily. Let's see. Mark, a question for you. What is the purpose of the secondary file?
Yeah, the secondary file is capturing the case where a structure has two addresses in the assessment data. So it might be facing two different streets. So the assessor gives it entrances on two different streets. So the assessor gives it two different addresses. This is not capturing the case where a street may have multiple names. Like around me, I'll have Montgomery Road, which is also US 22 and 3, which is also 3C Highway. We don't capture those address permutations. It's just where the assessor tells us where there are two distinct addresses associated with that structure.
Thanks, Mark. This is a great question. Are production versions of the Fabric available now? The version I'm reviewing is a preliminary version, and the location IDs begin with the number 9. I will answer by saying yes, the production version is available. And if you are using the preliminary version, you should not. That was only made available to kind of prepare. So now that the production version is available, that is the version that should be reported to. And Mark helped keep me honest here, but I believe that the location IDs in the production version begin with a 1, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the way to tell them apart. So I would, if you're still working with that file, send an email to nbfsupport@costquest.com and we'll make sure you get a download link for the newest file for your organization.
Great. Steve, this is kind of a question for you, and I think it's an application of the broadband serviceable location rules. So if a parcel has 3 structures on it, say they're like quadplex apartments, so 4 units within each structure, would that show up as 3 BSLs in the fabric, each with a unit count of 4? And can you talk a little bit more about the primary residence indicator that was mentioned before?
Yep. So first part first, yeah, absolutely. That is 3 BSLs, each with unit count of 4. The primary residence is going to come up, I think, primarily in single family homes. So you might have a single family home, picture a big place that has a pool house and a gatehouse and maybe a shed and maybe a garage that's separate. So there's, 6 buildings on that property, but it's a single family home. And so we need to identify as best we can what that home is. And that's what we mean by sort of that primary residence, that primary building. And that's the one we indicate as the BSL. Obviously, it is possible we've picked the wrong building. And so that's, again, what that challenge process is for. But if we're dealing with a single family home, we're only looking for 1 BSL.
Thanks, Steve. Chelsea, a question for you. Can we submit these challenges in bulk? We have a lot of them.
Yes, so there will be an opportunity to submit bulk challenges to the fabric in late June. I believe it's late June or early July. The FCC did release a public notice announcing the data specification for that, and I can put a link to that in the chat. And so I think, as I mentioned, if you are gathering your locations to challenge, please start doing that and start formatting them in accordance with that data specification. And then we are planning to open the initial window or opportunity to submit those bulk challenges that will be part of the BDC system, and we plan to launch that capability in September, and that will be after the filing window for the availability data closes.
Thanks, Chelsea. Maybe another question for you. So when the business is in the correct place, but the address is not correct, should I still select it for upload where I have fiber service and then file a challenge later to get the address fixed?
I will take this one, but Steve, please jump in if
I was bound to get this wrong sooner or later. So,
so no, I think that would be the correct approach. If you recognize the structure as one that you serve, then I would include it in the data. And then, as you mentioned, I think the address associated with it is incorrect. Then you can submit that as a challenge later, and something we can try to address in the next version.
Yeah, and the only thing I'd add to that is, and this is maybe a recurring theme, addresses are really messy. I mean, Mark has talked about situations where roads have 2 names or buildings face 2 roads. You get addresses that don't really exist, get added to commercial data sets, which then get sent around and used and reused. And so, what Chelsea said is absolutely right. It may be that there needs to be a challenge there. It may be that it's a non-standard address, and when it's standardized through USPS, it looks more like what we have in the fabric. It's hard for us to know ahead of time exactly what the issue is, but there's a lot of different things that might cause that kind of situation, unfortunately.
great. Thank you to you both. So I realize we have 4 minutes left. I'm gonna cover one more that I think I can answer, and then maybe I'm gonna ask the panelists if there are any other questions that they've seen come through that they think we should really try and squeeze in. I realize that we did not make it through all of the questions. But I do want to leave just a minute or two at the end to kind of make another plug for the Help Center and the technical assistance resources. And again, but so the one that I saw, is there a preference between polygons or location points when submitting data? No, I don't think we have a preference, but as a reminder, particularly for fixed wireless providers, you are required to submit supporting data on things like link budget and clutter data and things like that if your availability is expressed as a polygon. But we would also note that for our purposes and for purposes of the public facing map, those polygons are not going to be kind of rendered directly on the map, but rather everything's going to be converted to a list of points or locations, again, tied to locations in the fabric data. So with that, Chelsea, Steve, Mark, were there any other questions that came in that you think we really should try and get to before we bring it to a close?
So I did see one that is pretty, I think I can answer pretty quickly, about the fixed broadband subscription data requirement. That is essentially the same as what currently exists in Form 477. So still submit at the track level. You do not need to submit your subscribership data at the location level using the fabric.
Did we, Sean, I'm seeing a question here about when the challenge window closes. Did we address that or not? Because I think that might be useful to kind of cover, and I can take that if you want.
Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, so we don't have a challenge window that closes in the same way we have a filing window that closes, like a set date. We expect to continue to receive data sort of on a rolling basis for fabric challenges and eventually for challenges to the availability data when we get and publish those data as well. I will say though, as I mentioned, we have rounds of fabric data and are not able to change the fabric during a filing window. We need to get the data, the next round of the fabric data to the ISPs, say at the beginning of December. I don't think we have a firm date on that. This is not an announcement, TBD, but we need to give ISPs time to work with the data. And we need time to process the fabric challenge data that we get in advance of that release. So there is no firm end to it, but I would say the sooner the better. We've released the data to filers for the bulk challenge precisely because of that, because we want to forward load things as much as possible. So, if you have data, if you have challenges, get them ready into the format so you can file them as quickly when that challenge window opens as possible.
Thanks, Steve. That's a great reminder and a great plug. Mark, it looks like maybe you had a question you wanted.
Yeah, there was one specific person who had a question about duplicate location IDs. That's not a situation I'm familiar with. So please email NBF support and we'll take a look at that file and get that straightened out.
Thanks, Mark. And thanks to all of you for all of the questions. I think that they were all very informative. As a reminder, you can find a variety of technical assistance materials, including tutorial videos, knowledge base articles, FAQs, and other resources by visiting fcc.gov/broadbanddata/help. Questions about how to use the system and the BDC filing requirements may be submitted using the submit a request button at the top of that webpage. And if we did not get to your question today, please feel free to submit it using that feature. Thank you again for taking the time to participate in this workshop and for your efforts to timely file data in the BDC. We look forward to your participation and we hope you have a great rest of the day.